From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you on the program. Out with the old. Big-name parties lose their majority, opening the door for a new kingmaker. Green wave, significant breakthroughs for the party in France, Ireland, Finland and Germany. Tide turning, populist parties make key gains but fall short of a predicted watershed moment. Bucking the trend, what propelled voter turnout in this election to a 20-year high. And international joke, a Green politician lashes out at Nigel Farage in tonight's Raw Moment. All right, it is time to meet our panelists this evening. We have, of course, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at Euronews. Darren, what are you watching tonight?
I think it is the kind of turning tide when it comes to populists or right-wing. Have we seen peak populism to a degree at Tessa? Lots of them did very, very well last night. But politics, to a degree, is always about expectation. And we thought lots of them would have done a lot better than they did. And so in those circumstances, many think that the tide potentially is starting.
That's interesting. Where is peak populism? All right, also joining us tonight is Shada Islam. She's Director of Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe. Shada, what are you watching tonight?
The voter turnout. I think it's been quite remarkable. The indifference is gone. People are engaged and committed. And that has, I think, important repercussions for the Spitzenkandidat debate, but also for the future of European democracy.
That was one of the big stories that came out last night, the voter turnout. And also joining us tonight, Philip Schulmeister. He's head of polling at the European Parliament. What about you, Philip?
Well, I'll be watching actually all this time what has changed. Is the out with the old, in with the new? Has that happened? What has changed actually? What does it mean for the next week?
You were watching everything really closely from last night.
All five of those things.
All right. Well, OK, let's begin at that, because make no mistake, the real race for power here in Brussels has now begun. Because today, the dust is settling on the most exciting European election for a generation. And it seems like EU politics has finally caught up with that Europe's nations. That's because fragmentation is the word that you will keep hearing across this town today. And as the runners and riders take up their positions, well, it does look like that they're in for a crash course in coalition building. So, Darren, we were looking yesterday at these results. It seems, fragmentation. Everybody keeps talking about fragmentation. What is this going to mean?
Yeah, I think to a degree, there's definitely been a fragmentation, which is essentially a splintering into lots of different groups, but polarisation as well. We are continuing to see the bleeding away of support for the centre ground, and I've got a recap on all the events from last night. Often called a talking shop, but last night, with the light fading on a European election campaign like no other, the European Parliament was in listening mode. And it wasn't long before the voices of Europe's people filtered through to Brussels. As predicted, the night began with significant losses for the two mainstream pro-EU parties. The centre-right European People's Party looking set to drop more than 30 seats, while remaining the largest party. The centre-left dropped around 40, a set of results which sees them lose their combined majority in this chamber, and could well spell trouble for Angela Merkel's very own centrist coalition in Berlin. As the night went on, fragmentation was the word which came to echo through these halls. A populist tsunami? In the end, not quite, but certainly a wave. Marine Le Pen of France's National Rally topped the polls there, inflicting a blow to the embattled President Emmanuel Macron.
J'y vois la victoire du peuple, qui avec fierté et dignité a repris ce soir le pouvoir.
Victory too for her Italian ally, Matteo Salvini, a result which consolidates his dominant position in Italy and sets him up as leader of the new force of European populists.
È il segno di un'Europa che cambia.
Meanwhile, in Britain, it was an election which was never supposed to happen. And for the Conservatives and Labour, they ended up wishing it hadn't. Nigel Farage was the man of the night. His 6-week-old Brexit Party coming first, becoming the largest single party in Brussels. Farage, though, has his eye on a different parliament.
If we don't leave on October the 31st, then the scores you've seen for the Brexit Party today will be repeated in a general election, and we are getting ready for it.
But the pro-EU majority is holding, with turnout rising to a 20-year high. The Greens look set to play a dominant role over the next 5 years as they take 70 seats. The Liberals and Democrats too increasing their real estate, mostly thanks to Emmanuel Macron's en marche.
And that means that no solid, I underline solid, pro-European majority is possible without the help, without the participation of our new centrist group.
And with that, Guy Verhofstadt fired the starting gun in the real race for Europe's top job. Manfred Weber was in line to be crowned the next Commission President. But in this newly fragmented Parliament, the race is now wide open. Tomorrow it heats up with Europe leaders gathering to discuss their picks. Michel Barnier is a name you'll hear, and the Liberals' Margrethe Vestager too. Europe's voters have shifted the power dynamic here in these elections. The result? Well, the makeup of the new Brussels is still very much up for grabs.
All right, let's follow on the word of the evening and of the day, fragmentation. Shada, I'll ask you this. Fragmentation or simply better representation? How would you see it?
Better representation, a more accurate reflection of what Europe looks like today, the political landscape of Europe, the national landscape. You know, for too long, the European Parliament has been two big parties working together, the so-called grand bargain, and the other voices were muted, not really heard. And I think this is going to be a much more democratic, more lively, more interesting Parliament.
But also harder to move forward on
harder
issues.
to move forward, but expressing and reflecting the plurality of Europe today. You know, different voices, different interests. And the challenge is going to be responsible leadership. So I'm looking forward to seeing how our politicians perform in this new climate and new landscape.
Okay, and Philip, you were crunching the numbers all night. You were looking at this. So Greens, the Liberals, and the Nationalists, you know, they made their gains here. What does that mean in terms of coalition building? If you're looking at the numbers, how do you see the puzzle changing and fitting in?
Well, indeed, everything that has been said is true. I mean, there will be no majority anymore for the EPP and the SD. At the same time, indeed, I would also challenge the use of the word fragmentation. I don't think this is what we are looking at. Do we have more political groups tonight or today than we had the day before? No, we don't. We have a consolidation, if you want, for the Liberals. We have a strengthening of the Greens. And I also wouldn't say that their voices were necessarily muted over the past 5 years. So, but they will come in stronger. They will have more to say, necessarily. And I think from what we have heard yesterday already from the lead candidates and from the group representatives, this is what will be the most interesting thing. How do these, let's say, four political forces come together to build something new? Because this is their task, and this is a daunting task, that's for sure, but very, very interesting to watch.
So where are the compromises going to come from, you think, Darren?
Well, I think the compromises are going to have to come from actually almost on an ad hoc basis, that, parties are clearly going to have to work together. And I think the fragmentation bit, I accept that there are not more parties, but actually the kind of power distribution is more fragmented and more spread, given the fact that the two main parties aren't quite as big as they once were. But I think this is also a continent that is used to coalitions and used to having to work parties across the political spectrum. I mean, only look at Belgium, where we are right now. This Parliament will see through, but ultimately it is more representative of the people out there who have voted for it. Clearly, more of them have voted for it than they have done in the last 25 years. And also, we're going to see lots more colourful characters in this Parliament, not least of all people
Certainly looking forward to that.
People like Silvio Berlusconi, for example, and obviously Nigel Farage is back and others. So I think in many regards, people actually might engage with this institution on a level that they've not done previously.
And, we spoke with a lot of people last night, in fact. So we spoke to Bas Eickhout from the Greens, and he said he's going to push forward a stronger green policy. And this is when you talk of having a harder push, it means the compromise is going to have to come from the traditional centre before. Is that what we're going to see here when it comes to push and pull now? They feel more emboldened, those parties that obviously gained last night.
And rightly so. I mean, they have won, and the Greens have done very well, and so I think they will have a voice. They said they'll be the, they'll be the party. So they're going to be part of any king-making, coalition-making process. I think rightly so. But just one thing, Tessa, the Green Party has won on the green credentials, but so have many other parties. I mean, climate change was an issue that was important for the electorate and for many parties. So the Greens have really won on that, but also on civil liberties. I think that was a very strong message from the Greens on migration, on civil liberties and climate change.
I mean, we talked a lot about kingmakers. Who is going to be wearing the crown? Can you say that?
Many crowns?
I definitely cannot say who is going to wear the crown, but no, it will be a question of negotiating over the next days. I mean, as far as I know, Weber is already inviting group leaders tonight for first talks, and we will take it on from there.
I think Manfred Weber said that no coalition can be made without the EPP, and Verhofstadt had made the same statement about ALDE, definitely claiming their territory. What does this mean for the Spitzenkandidat, the lead candidate
Well, it's quite interesting, and we are seeing this kind of tug-of-war already start to play out. We heard from the CDU in Germany today, insistence that the EPP were committed to this process.
But not the Liberals.
Committed to they're clearly committed to the process. Other people are saying that they're committed to the process. The clear question is, with the EPP having lost seats and the Social Democrats, can they really claim, even if they remain, at least the EPP, the largest party? But also, don't forget the distribution of these jobs, and we're looking specifically at the Commission President here job, also has to fit into a wider scheme that there are 3 key jobs up for grabs this summer, including the Council President and the head of the Central Bank. And ultimately, whoever gets the Commission, and there'll be the Parliament President as well, whoever gets one job, that will have to be then floated off and compared to who else gets other jobs. So there'll have to be a balancing act, not just of the parties here in Parliament, but also of the other institutions.
Okay, before we go very quickly, just a yes or no maybe from you, Shada. The Commission President job, you think that name is going to come out from outside of the list of lead candidates?
I don't think it can now, because, the voter turnout has been so strong. It's validated European Parliament, the democracy, and I think the EU Council cannot
turn away. So you're confident that this process will be fulfilled?
It would be a kind of betrayal of the elections if they were to take someone outside the Spitzen this time around.
All right, we'll watch that. Okay, elsewhere in Europe now, it was an evening filled with huge highs for some, but severe lows for others, as Austria comes to terms with one broken alliance. And over in Hungary, could a new partnership be on the horizon? Let's take a look. A resounding victory for Viktor Orban. Hungary's strongman leader cemented Fidesz's hold on power at home with a strong showing in Europe. The right-wing party scooped 13 seats and a whopping 52% of the votes, strides ahead of any other party.
A minden korábbinál magasabb részvétellel Magyarország azt bizonyította, hogy
But after that big win, will Mr. Orban stay with the European People's Party, which lost seats, or try his hand in a new alliance?
Viel erwartet, wir waren optimistisch, aber das ist ein Ergebnis, das ist fulminant.
No rest for those in Austria this morning. Despite a surge in support for Chancellor Sebastian Kurz's People's Party, the electoral high could be short-lived. Mr. Kurz today faced a no-confidence vote after his government collapsed amid a Russian corruption scandal. A muted applause for Greece's Alexis Tsipras, who's been forced to call a snap election after his leftist Syriza party suffered heavily in last night's results. Winning a meager 24% of the vote, the party was overshadowed by the conservative New Democracy Party, events which could see Greeks heading back to the polls by the end of June.
Απευθυνόμαστε λοιπόν για άλλη μια φορά σε αυτό το στήριγμα. Το μοναδικό μας στήριγμα.
All right, so we saw there, lots of things happening. Austria, Sebastian Kurz there lost a no-confidence vote in his country. So as you were saying earlier, there are going to be new elections on the horizon in the continent. But I'd like to ask you, Philip, about Fidesz and Viktor Orban's party in terms of, does the EPP need Fidesz now more than ever? Seeing the results in terms of numbers. Again, we're going to the numbers of
I think like any other political family that is now in this contest, let's say, for the lead candidate, the EPP needs reliable partners. And it will be up to Orban and to Fidesz to demonstrate whether they can and won't be these partners. Purely in mathematical terms, or if you want counting numbers, we have now 35 seats between the EPP and the Social Democrats, 13 up or down. If I follow what Manfred Weber said yesterday evening, might not make all that much of a difference.
Okay.
But
again, that's up for negotiations.
We should just point out that Viktor Orban, obviously, even though he's inside the EPP but suspended, does not want Manfred Weber to become a Commission President.
There you go.
Does not like him.
Lots of things could still change. All right, since the European Parliament elections began, voter turnout has been steadily declining. We saw that graph going down. But this weekend, citizens across the continent seem to say we're interested, in fact, in European politics again. And with the highest turnout in over 20 years. That's what we saw last night. Alex, in the Cube, what can you tell us?
I can tell you, Tessa, that headline figure made it into the European Parliament's take on all this, really saying this was great turnout, the highest in 20 years. Why does it matter, though? Why does any of this matter? Well, it comes back to that question of who turned up, who stayed home, who cares when it comes to the European Union and the role it plays in their lives. This is perhaps the best sense we can get in terms of answering that question, who cares? And look, you've seen plenty of graphs. The general trend was down, and then we had this leap up. That's found 5% increase on 2004. But who stayed home? Who turned up? Well, here in the Cube, we love a good map, and this one here, this shows you the darker the colour, the stronger the voter turnout. Now, worth saying, in 5 EU countries, there's compulsory voting. So let's start with 2 of those. You can see perhaps the darkest of the reds, Belgium, Luxembourg, over 80% voter turnout. But have a look at this. When we go down to, if we just then cross across, we're looking at Bulgaria, just down here. You can see, I don't know if you can quite see there, quite pale. Compulsory voting there, yet 30% turnout. I mean, have a look at that. Really staggering difference. Other countries with really big turnouts this year, it's worth noting. Spain, Malta. Let's just bring you up the tweet from Malta, where they're saying nearly 73% turnout in Malta. Well over 60%, 64% in Spain. So a lot of countries really sort of like showing off the fact they've done quite well. So that's perhaps the stories of the compulsory voting and the higher numbers. Who really didn't care? Well, I think we're going to look at Slovakia for that one. 23%, I should say. Now, while there is a leap from 13% last time around, 23% turnout, not suggesting there's a mass of interest there. Then we go into Slovenia, Czech Republic, those countries just under 30% interest, just under where we saw Bulgaria was at. But there have been some big changes. Let's go back to our map. Let's look at Poland here. They have seen over 20% increase in voter turnout. Spain as well. We saw Spain saying we've got 60% turnout. Well, that is up roughly 18% on last time around. So when you look at this map, it's redder. It's darker in terms of the colour than perhaps people were expecting. So people did turn up. People did care. Although the distribution of those is, I suppose you could say, spread between very high densities and quite low densities, the overall story, Tessa, was at a time, whether they like it or loathe it, people are turning up to vote and have their say on the future of Europe.
All right, thanks for that, Alex. Okay, very quickly, Shada, what drove that high turnout this time around?
Great engagement by the politicians, newspapers and the news media outlets like yours, making Europe exciting, talking about the intricacies, the diversity and the passion, bringing young people out. I think a lot of it worked, and I think really this shows there's no going back. There's no going back to indifference and, you know, I couldn't care less about voting. People are showing a commitment.
So there's one thing, there's interest, but what about fear? Fear of nationalist parties.
Oh, I think to counter that influence, you know, to stop that. Yes, that also, but also voting for green, voting for change.
So it's a pro-vote rather than just an against vote.
I think it's a pro-vote, and I think it shows that we've reached a quality of democracy that I'm really happy about.
The EU spent an awful lot of money
and that too.
on advertising campaigns.
Well, you guys were also out there, right?
Honestly,
all
not
of us.
that much. But
It's all of us.
Philip? How much was it?
I don't have the exact figures, but it wasn't
no revelations here, right?
It's all of us.
For now. Okay, coming up on Raw Politics, is the tide turning on Eurosceptics? Why populist parties fell short of an expected breakthrough? That's coming up next. Plus, Greens' momentum. Can mainstream parties tempt them to partner up? That's after the break.
don't leave on October the 31st, then the scores you've seen for the Brexit Party today will be repeated in a general election, and we are getting ready for it. Thank you.
Well, welcome back to Raw Politics. That was Nigel Farage, leader of the Brexit Party. Now, 6 months ago, that party did not exist, but last night they came top of the poll, making unprecedented gains across the UK, while support for the Conservative and Labour Party crumbled. It was also a strong night for a resurgent Liberal Democrat Party. Now, their simple pro-Remain message putting them in second place. And for more, I am joined now from London by our correspondent Vincent McAviney, who is with the leader of the Brexit Party. Vincent.
That's right, Tessa. It's been a bit of a mixed picture across Europe, but there definitely is a victor here in London, and that is Nigel Farage, who joins me now. Nigel, in the space of a few months, you've come out of retirement, set up a new party, and you've got more MEPs than anyone else in Europe. How does it feel?
I'm delighted in one way, although slightly frustrated. I thought I was done with politics. I mean, we won the referendum. We'd had a general election in which it was, big promise made that actually Brexit would get carried out. I've come back to it because the 29th of March was the big day we were supposed to leave. We haven't. We're now told it's October the 31st. And frankly, if we left this to the existing Conservative and Labour parties, it simply wouldn't happen.
And you're going back to Brussels with a new team around you, but you don't know how long you're going back for. What is it you plan to do there?
Well, we're going to be vociferous, stand up for our point of view, represent our constituents. That's obvious. But what we really want to do is this. We've got a mandate. We're going to be in Brussels. That's where the negotiations are going on as we head up towards this new deadline of the 31st of October. Many of the men and women that have been elected on the Brexit Party lists are businessmen, businesswomen of considerable experience, people who've done deals for a living, people who've run big companies, employed tens of thousands of people. We want to be part of that negotiating team to make sure that we're all ready to leave on October the 31st on WTO rules or whatever else.
You've said during this campaign that it's only the start. You've said that you might fight Westminster seats. You're fighting a by-election right now. And you've also said to us here on Euronews about changing the voting system. So what is next for you? Are you going to make a run for Westminster?
Well, I think we've got a two-party system that's dominated England totally and most of Wales for the last 100 years and more. It is a system that pretty much serves itself and almost nobody else. Both those parties are coalitions that contain within them strong Remainers and strong Leavers. We think the whole thing needs breaking apart. We think Westminster needs to be a lot more representative of the country as a whole. Clearly, the voting system is out of date for the 21st century. The House of Lords is a complete anachronism. As the Brexit referendum showed, the ability of citizens to vote directly on some issues can reinvigorate democracy. So we are about fundamental political change and reform. And the idea that we would just hand back to the same parties that betrayed their promises on Brexit and just walk away, it just isn't going to happen. We're here for the long term.
Just turning to some of those other parties, the Lib Dems had a strong night as well, and they're disputing the numbers. They say if you add up their percentage with the other parties that were unequivocally for Remain, like the SNP and Plaid, that they actually got a greater vote share than you did, and it was only 5.2 million backing you, not the 17 million from the referendum. And they're saying this shows that there needs to be another referendum. What do you make of those claims?
It's funny, these Remainers never accept the result of anything. They don't accept the referendum. They don't accept the elections. Look, if you look at it, with the Brexit Party, the UKIP vote, and the Conservatives who are committed to Brexit, even the Labour Party officially are committed to Brexit, it's 58% versus 38%. Will they please stop whining?
Just one very quick last one. What do you make of the Conservative leadership election? And any words for your old colleague Gerard Batten, who has lost UKIP all its seats?
Well, let's start with UKIP. They've blown it. They've let the wrong people in, gone down the wrong path. This is a very clear example that the British public, they don't mind people with strong opinions, but they hate extremism, and that's what's killed UKIP off. In terms of the Tory leadership, well, it's very interesting, isn't it? All the leading contenders who are saying a variety of things now about what needs to happen in the run-up to the 31st of October, all of them voted for Mrs May's new European treaty. Why would I trust any of them?
So no horses you're backing there, Nigel.
Okay. Why would I trust any of them? I mean,
Right, thank you very much, Nigel. Nigel has now got a press conference going on here in central London as well, celebrating, I think, with a few pints with your new MPs. Yeah, probably. Yeah, okay. Back to you, Tessa.
Right. Thanks for that, Vincent McAviney and Nigel Farage there. Well, here with us to discuss this is independent British MEP Stephen Wolfe. We also have Laura Shields, a communications expert and managing director of Red Thread Communications, and James Crisp, a Brussels correspondent for The Telegraph. All right, so we heard there from Nigel Farage. He's going to come back to Brussels to make sure that he never has to come back, that Brexit actually happens. James, a reaction to what Nigel Farage said there?
Well, it's a couple of things.
And it's no surprise that Brexit Party won.
No, it isn't a surprise. I mean, what is surprising is claiming that he has a mandate to helm negotiations over Brexit, because, you know, if the Brexit Party does well in a local election, you wouldn't expect them to take over something which is the exclusive purview of government. The turnout in the European elections was only 37%. In general election, it's much higher. So, I mean, that,
and
you know...
referendum.
Exactly, you know. That, I think, is, well, to put it delicately, garbage. But he does say, he does make some very interesting points about the two-party system looking particularly broken. And I think what's clear is that, you know, people like a simple message. And the other sort of message, really, is Britain is every bit as divided as it's been since the referendum. You know, to quote Theresa May, nothing has changed.
No, absolutely. Well, we can see it from that. What about the Lib Dems coming in second? What does that tell you?
I think it tells us the Lib Dems are back, but let's face it, we started from a fairly low standing point. I think also what it tells us is that Remain voters from the Tories and the Labour Party have piled into the Lib Dems as their preferred candidates to show their support for Remain. I mean, on top of that, of course, you did have a strong showing for Greens, the SNP. So I think it does tell us that the Lib Dems are back. And of course, as James was saying, fortune favours those with bold message. So am I allowed to say the B word on this programme?
Yeah.
OK, so bollocks to Brexit. I mean, you know, lots of people were saying, oh, you know, the Lib Dems shouldn't be saying that. You know, apparently the old, sort of some of the older members didn't like it, but actually cut through with a lot of people. And actually Brexit is a barroom fight. And the Lib Dems have been too nice for years. And so going in with that very clear, simple message where they nailed their colours unambiguously to the mast meant that they were able to scoop up a lot of that Remain support.
And so the third thing that we saw in the UK vote was the complete obliteration pretty much of the two main parties. So what do you make of that?
Well, it means that they've all lost the plot in terms of listening to their members and listening to their constituents. In the Labour Party, the vast majority of members want to remain, but in the northern areas where I campaigned and lived, they all clearly want to leave, and that's why they're supporting the Brexit Party. In the Conservative Party, you've got a vast number of members that want to leave, but a whole constituency of MPs who want to remain. And this means that, in reality, they have to look inward on themselves and, if necessary, break up. Because in the reality, the vast number of those Remainer Labour MPs and Remainer Conservatives are simply Liberal Democrats. And maybe they should be looking to cross the floor going, they're not really true Conservatives, not really true Labourites. And then we'll have the alignment in politics that is necessary to face the next elections. And what Nigel is right about, and what we campaigned when I was in his party before I became independent, and what he's doing again, is politics is broken, and it's broken because we have a method of electing our MPs in Parliament that no longer is fit for purpose. It doesn't represent the people, and that needs to change as well.
We were all united on that, I think, sitting on the couch. We all agree with Nigel Farage that politics is broken. And I completely... And the reason we're in the mess that we're in now is because when Theresa May came into power in 2016, she didn't realise what the situation was that she was inheriting, and she behaved in a winner-takes-all traditional Conservative Party, first-past-the-post type fashion, when actually this country is crying out for a major cross-party, you know...
So we're going to see that.
That was one of the reasons, actually, why the EU couldn't really get their head around why a cross-party consensus couldn't be built. Because, you know, you look at Belgium, you look at most other Europe, the Dutch...
It's so deeply ingrained, then.
History of a more sort of
But there is an element about this in terms of British politics, and also in something so fundamental, whether you're buying a business, whether you have a divorce from your husband or wife, you have to make a stance. And yes, there are elements of negotiations, but in reality, you leave. And Theresa May's major fallacy was believing that she could try and create this consensus between all politics. She had to go one way or the other. That was the only solution, and she failed miserably. This election is people saying, you failed miserably. We want either leave or remain, and we're backing parties.
Well, do a quick reaction on the idea of a second referendum. We were hearing, you know, the backing is coming in for that. If nothing has changed, as you said earlier, What's the point?
Well, I mean, I think that's a question a lot of people will be asking themselves here in Brussels as well as in Britain. You know, I was speaking to some people today and I said, well, look, you know, what does this mean for the Brexit negotiations? And they said, well, unless these elections somehow alter the trajectory on which we're travelling, nothing. I mean, the Lib Dems have got their 16 MEPs. They're going into a group with Emmanuel Macron. I mean, imagine that tightrope. Macron says no more Brexit extension, and Vince Cable is saying we need time for a second referendum.
Well, we're running out of time. Just a yes or no. You think second referendum is going to happen?
I think it all depends on what happens with Labour, and what we're seeing is that you're starting to get the front bench to inch out, and so they are shifting their positions. So watch this space.
All right. On that note, coming up on Raw Politics, how did the populist or anti-establishment parties fare in last night's election? Are they going to be the force that they wanted to be? That's coming up next. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, populists have made big gains across the continent last night, but fell short of expectations of producing a continent-wide surge that many of them had hoped for. Now, in France, Marine Le Pen's national rally won more than 23% of the votes, narrowly beating Emmanuel Macron's centrist list. Le Pen has previously signaled that she would join Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini's far-right alliance after the European elections. Now, in Belgium, which also held national and regional elections, there was also a nationalist surge. In the European vote, the far right of Vlaams Belang came second with 11% of the votes, just after the moderate separatist Flemish NVA party. And in Italy, Matteo Salvini's far-right League Party came out on top with 34%, doubling its vote from the 2018 national elections, while its governing partner, the Five Star Movement, lost half of its voters. Now, Emmanuel Macron in France may have narrowly lost to Le Pen, but he is now turning his attention and his influence to Brussels. Well, our correspondent, Annelise Borges, she's joining us now from Paris. So, Annelise, the day after the results have come out, what is the next step for Macron? What's he looking at?
Well, for members of La République En Marche, the party, the movement that is led by Emmanuel Macron, that was created by the French president, it's time to forge ahead and focus on forging alliances with other European parties across the bloc to move on with their plan to renew the European project. And of course, this was a setback for Emmanuel Macron. He had put all his energy into trying to avoid that Marine Le Pen came out first. He lost that bet, but he's certainly trying at least to show European allies that he can still be the new de facto leader of this European renaissance that he's been trying so hard to achieve. He is going to be hosting the Spanish Prime Minister later tonight here at the Élysée Palace for a dinner. And tomorrow, Emmanuel Macron will be heading to Brussels to meet, among others, Donald Tusk and Angela Merkel. And of course, once again, symbolic loss for Emmanuel Macron. But perhaps the biggest losers here in France were traditional parties that were virtually wiped out yesterday, including, of course, the right-wing Les Républicains and the socialists who, among them, governed France for over 50 years. They made very poor results. The biggest surprise here as well, the surge of the Greens that are now hoping their positive results, combined with other positive results in Germany and Ireland, can translate into a green wave sweeping the European Union. Emmanuel Macron might try to charm some of them to come to his camp and try to make this ambitious European renewal a reality.
All right. Thank you for that, Annelise Borges, our correspondent there in Paris. Okay, well, joining us to talk about this is Ryan Heath. He's political editor at Politico Europe. And also with us, an MEP-elect, Petra de Sutter from Groen, a Belgian Green Party. And still with us, Shada Islam, Director of Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe. Okay, let us talk about Emmanuel Macron first. So, Ryan, I'll go to you too. Mm-hmm. It's seen as, okay, he didn't do as well as expected. His influence, questionable in France, whether that had any impact. But is he still influential on the European stage?
Absolutely. You can't do anything in these new EU job changeovers if you don't have the support of the Council. And he's still number 2, clearly in the Council. We saw on Brexit, he's willing to dig his heels in if it matters to him, so he's going to do it again with these jobs. He repeated his vote share from the first round of the 2017 presidential election. And Marine Le Pen actually went backwards compared to her 2014 vote. So yes, everyone wants to win, but no one's going to remember 1 seat difference in a couple of months' time when Emmanuel Macron is back where his power is at the summit table.
And so what does that say about, populism or anti-established nationalist parties, whatever you want to call them? What does that say about them in terms of, they wanted to have a lot more influence in this parliament?
They wanted the influence, Tessa, but I never believed that they would get it. I mean, this has been the scenario in many elections. Huh?
They did have gains.
They have gains, but they haven't done the enormous wave that was supposed to, they were going to sort of demolish all the other parties. They've got 25% more or less of the parliament.
And they're divided still as
and
well.
they're very divided. So I never believed their bluff, and I think a lot of our media has fallen for it. The leaders are glossy, glamorous, and they talk the talk. But I think when push comes to shove, European voters know exactly who they want, and they want the mainstream and the Greens and the Lib Dems, So this represents the accurateness of the electorate at the moment, European electorate.
And Petra, it's your first time getting elected as an AP, and congratulations on that. When you're looking at the potential, the new makeup of the upcoming parliament, and we're talking here about the populist nationalist groups, what are your expectations with regard to working with them or how they will influence legislation, the process here?
Well, of course, they will have some influence. They can block procedures and they will have some weight, but they will not, I don't think they will really not change the way that the parliament will move forward, because there is still a large majority of pro-European and progressive forces that, of course, now we have to see how this alliance will take shape. And the Greens probably will have a key role in that. We will be part of that game.
Yep.
So because of the wave that we've seen in many countries, unfortunately a bit less in Flanders, but that has a specific reason. But even in France, in Germany, in the UK.
Yeah, we've seen that wave. Okay, on that note, because you guys did really well as well in these elections, because it wasn't just the populists, as we were talking about earlier, who stole support from the mainstream parties. The Greens, as we've mentioned, had their strongest ever performance in European elections. So going from 50 seats in 2014 to 70 this time around, making them the 4th largest party in the new parliament. So that there is the moment. The German Green Party erupted in celebration, clearly very happy, as news of their win swept into party headquarters, securing over 20% of the vote and increasing their MEPs from 9 to 22. So Germany was at the forefront of Europe's green wave. But the party boasted similar victories in Ireland, Finland and France. And the results come after months of climate marches surging across the continent, as the Swedish teen Greta Thunberg led an army of young activists with a call to action, which resonated across the globe. Now, speaking last night, the European Greens co-leader, Ska Keller, had this to say.
The European Parliament is the place to, for example, work on climate protection, because climate does not stop at the borders. And we have seen that this is a great concern for citizens all over the European Union. So we will not, in this Parliament, get around that issue. As Greens, we certainly don't want to get around this issue, but it's also clearly a call to other parties and groups to take that issue seriously and not anymore obstruct votes on climate justice as they have done in the past 5 years and even before.
All right, so as a Green MEP, I mean, was it a surprise for you that this result came?
No, we expected it, because we've seen many months of people in the street, youngsters.
So thanks to the young people, in fact, this galvanized
so there is a lot
movement.
of popular support for this message, that we really have to act now. And we are, of course, the most ambitious political family in the European Parliament to set the standards that we want to achieve. And people are listening to this, absolutely. And of course, we combine the ecological targets with a social agenda. It's very important that you leave nobody behind. We have realistic proposals, and apparently people really want a new narrative, a new story, some hope for the future, and the Greens are offering this, yes.
All right, so what about the Greens as a kingmaker? And clearly they won on the climate issue, but there are a whole host of issues in this parliament. Do you think that the Greens would play a crucial role in non-green issues?
Absolutely. I think it's very clear that on tax and transparency issues, the Greens are going to come into very fertile ground. The climate alignment is very good. Otherwise, you might say we can leave the Greens out. We can do this without the Greens. I think this broader policy background of people being so angry about climate means the Greens will be in. But one stumbling block for them is there are literally no Greens in half of the European countries. So it's a green wave in the north and the west. There are a few stragglers in the Baltics and in the Free Alliance partners in Spain, but really in half of Europe, there aren't any Greens at all.
So what does that mean? It's not in terms of influence, what does that mean?
It means that if you need to have geographic balance in the package of top jobs, if you want to look after some big countries to make sure they don't feel left out, like Poland, which is not very green in its policy making at the moment, you know, the Greens are going to have to overcome that as a hurdle, because there will be a bunch of people who say, well, the Greens don't represent us, even though the Greens are surging in some of these very big countries.
And what about in terms of other policies, Shad? Are you confident that they're going to be able to present quite a comprehensive set of policies?
I see their importance, Tessa, in trade.
In trade,
I think that's going to be a very important part. Foreign policy to some extent as well, but I see the trade agenda, the European trade agenda, being quite influenced.
Do you think that they're the minority in maybe trying to block trade deals that don't comply with,
I hope it's not blocking. I hope it's more incentivizing and making sure that other countries follow the green agenda, sustainable development, Agenda 2030. I hope it's not blocking. I think it should be more incentivizing and encouraging the rest of the world to follow suit, because everybody is thinking about climate change. Everyone's worried about climate change. India, China, whatever, you know. So moving forward in a positive, constructive way, I would say.
So how would you deal with Donald Trump?
Well, you know that we had an amendment trying to ask that the Americans would respect the Paris Agreement if we wanted to start again talking about the trade agreement with the US. We just lost it with one vote. But that means that we almost had a majority for that amendment. And we think that European Parliament can really lead or come to a conclusion on this, that if we want to trade with the US, they really should also uphold the Paris Agreement targets that were set. And in this way, indeed, Europe can be a motor in the rest of the world through trade agreements. We are very critical of trade agreements for many reasons, environmental, social, human rights aspects, and now also this climate agreement that we want to respect. We can set an example.
Okay, very quickly, Ryan, on a broader scale, now that it seems, you know, some are saying, oh, because of the turnout in Europe, Europe is back, there's legitimacy in its institutions. Do you think that Europe is now in a position to be stronger when it comes to getting other countries, the US, China, Russia, onto the same table and getting them to follow a path, like, let's say, a green path or a more social path?
Well, I think the strength comes from unity. So what the turnout showed is that the EU is more resilient than its critics give it credit for, and it shows this time and time again. So it shouldn't be a surprise now that when the EU seems down, it rises back up again. But if you have a situation where anyone can veto a given foreign policy or a trade policy, that weakens Europe at these global tables. So it's going to have to become faster and more united if it wants to have that.
But I think that's a good key word that came out of the elections last night: resilience. All right, coming up on Raw Politics, the European Greens' strong performance in yesterday's elections has us wondering, is the green wave unstoppable? We want to know what you think on that question. Your call is coming up at 7 p.m. Brussels time. The contact information, there it is on your screen. Call us at 00800 333 7002 and join the debate. Use the hashtag #RawPolitics, and our lines are opening very soon after the break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, as usual, after the show, we have your call tonight, and that is coming up at 7 p.m. Brussels time and 6 p.m. if you are in the UK and Ireland. And, of course, hosting tonight is Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, and Jack Parrick, our Brussels correspondent. So Stephen Wolf will be joining them tonight as well. And Laura Shield, she's with us. She won't be on your call, but she's joining us to discuss this portion of the program. All right, Darren, what are the questions? So we always ask our viewers 3 questions. What are they tonight?
And given what's been a really interesting election, we've got an election bonanza for you tonight. Let's have a look.
A green wave sweeps the European Parliament with a projected 71 seats.
We have been campaigning on climate protection, on biodiversity protection, but also on a social Europe and making sure that civil liberties are being upheld all over the European Union.
After months of student protests, young voters drive double-digit scores across Europe's biggest countries, including a stunning 20% in Germany. And establishment groups want in on the momentum.
The Greens are also the winners of the day.
Is the Green wave unstoppable? Populists rising, the big story in the run-up to last night's election. But according to exit polls, Eurosceptic parties in France, Italy, Poland and Hungary did well, but not better than expected, and in some cases, much worse. Pro-EU parties will still hold a fragmented majority, while the Liberals now see themselves as the kingmaker.
The two classical parties, Socialists and Conservatives, will no longer have a majority.
So is the tide turning on Eurosceptics? A blow for German Chancellor Angela Merkel's coalition, which suffered its worst score in European history. As the Queen of Europe's reign comes to an end, who will replace her as Europe's symbolic leader? It's safe to say Emmanuel Macron wants the job, but his Renaissance party fell short, losing to Marine Le Pen's far right. Or could it be Matteo Salvini pushing his anti-establishment agenda continent-wide? What do you think? Who should be the leader of Europe? So come on, Europe, have your say. Is the Green wave unstoppable? Is the tide turning on Eurosceptics? And who should be the leader of Europe?
And you know what to do? Pick up the phone. It is free. 00800 333 702. What your views on those election questions? You can email us at rawpoll@euronews.com. Use the hashtag rawpolitics on the Facebook or the Twitter, or find us on Skype.
Indeed.
Also using Raw Politics.
Indeed. Okay, so let's talk about the who should be the leader of Europe, because that's exactly what we're focusing on now in Europe. You can start. You can give a name, or you can give a what kind of leader.
Nigel Farage.
Okay, who is supposed to be the leader?
Well, actually, I'm unemployed in a few weeks' time, so if you do need someone to help who can cross over borders. But actually, I'm thinking Austrian Prime Minister Kurz.
Why is that?
He seems to have balanced the Eurosceptics in his own country, yet being able to talk to Macron and also Merkel. So you've got a hand there that understands the Eurosceptic movement, but also doesn't want to leave the European Union.
So not a Spitzenkandidat.
No, he has just lost a vote of confidence this afternoon.
He did.
Well, breaking news.
What about you, Laura?
Well, when you say the leader, do you mean who should be the head of the European Commission?
Yeah.
A woman. It should be a woman. Now, that doesn't mean it should be Vestager. Yes, I think it's about time we had a woman.
And what we're doing, so, we would have Angela Merkel, more the symbolic leader.
Yeah, you mean the symbolic leader. Okay,
yes.
well, if we're talking about the head of the Commission, I wanted a woman. Symbolic leader, I don't know if Merkel's going. I think it depends on what you want. I think it does need to be somebody who can balance the Eurosceptics with the rest of Europe. I don't know. I mean, I have to say, I think that it's going to be very, very difficult, because I don't think there is one Europe, and therefore, what does it mean?
Well,
so no one can replace Merkel, is that
this is a pitch, and there's a tug-of-war happening, and at the moment, you'd have to say there's Emmanuel Macron on one side and Matteo Salvini on the other, and the scrapping over the future of Europe. And but the thing is, that they are the two who've got at least a defined sense of what Europe should be and where they want it to go. And that's why I think the kind of forces are coalescing behind those two. Whether they're likeable characters or not, well,
you've got Macron who's willing to beat his own people.
All right, so there's not a big name.
And Salvini is not liked by a lot of Europe. I mean, this is the real dilemma.
Well, and Salvini who's also getting a bit of a backlash in Italy as well now.
Okay, well, if you want to join in that debate, you know what to do. Just use the hashtag Raw Politics and call in tonight. Okay, before we go, we have time for tonight's Raw Moment. It comes from the UK, where one Green councillor wasn't going to let Nigel Farage's victory go unchallenged. Take a look.
Fair enough, but is it not the case for that clown over there, we wouldn't be the international joke that we now are? A divided society, this country is split in half, and it's all because of Hitler. Wait a minute, sorry, I haven't finished speaking. What we need to do, as Dan Hannan correctly said, is bring the country together. This man over there is not the person to do that. He is the one tearing us apart.
You were already reacting off air, so you might feel
I mean, I've seen this. When I used to go through Westminster, where Darren interviews people out there, I'd have the Remainers with their flags on them, putting cameras in there, calling me all sorts of names that I won't repeat on this show. Division is caused by different political leaders. You cannot just call it down to Nigel Farage. There are other political leaders. Anna Soubry, I would say, had a very strong kind of Andrew Adonis.
So you're clearly not happy with what we just saw there, but international joke was what he was saying there.
If you want to unite, you've got to stop this.
Thank you very much for watching, and do not forget to call in your call after the program. Have a good evening.